You have to have your own voice. There are a variety of people that can deliver a message, but there are not a variety of people that can inspire people. Mass number of people. If you're giving that gift, and it has to be perfected. I'm deeply comfortable in my own voice. So you have the ability, if you're eloquent, to, I think, draw on a deeper level of the human condition in your spirit that comes out and it's manifested in words.
Well, I think what I've been able to do is merge confidence with being charismatic. And so one of the things I think is that my confidence really beams because I'm a charismatic individual. And so as I'm talking to individuals, or if I'm talking to large groups, or even one-on-one, I'm always conveying confidence because I'm always centered on the mere fact that what I'm saying is something that I truly believe.
Question: to understand? Answer: by effectively communicating. A simple answer, yet so elusive that to this day it slips through human hands. History tells us that cultures have been destroyed, nations have been conquered, and entire civilizations have been wiped out because common ground could not be reached. Why? Because they didn't understand each other. Why? Because they failed to communicate effectively. Today in America, there is an abundance of ethnicities with varying languages, dialects, cultures, and subcultures. This means that the likelihood of misunderstanding is high, as is the need for effective communication, for without it, chaos will ensue. This film consists of interviews of 3 men who learned at an early age how to communicate effectively. By citing examples from their own experiences, they show us how people can consistently get mutually agreed upon results, thus enabling all of us to get along.
I would say first and foremost, it is okay to be who you are, but there's nothing wrong with trying to improve who you are. If you're trying to get someplace in life, like I'm saying to you right now, I have to be able to communicate to all different types of people. If I am just speaking slang or ebonics, as you said, there are some folks that are not going to relate to that. There are some job interviews where that is just not going to work.
Let's look at it from a perspective if a police officer stops 2 young African American males on the corner. Well, having an ability to articulate where you're going might just save your life. So if the officer says, yo, you know it's 12 o'clock, where are you headed to? We're headed home, officer. We live on 12th Street, 3 blocks away from here. We're coming from our aunt house. Versus, what you beefing with me for? Which is a whole different posture. And so, going for a job interview, tell me about yourself. Well, one of the things you don't want to say, I'm from North Philadelphia, I went to this school, I went to that school. In interviews, when the prospective person who's interviewing you asks you to tell them about yourself, it's, I'm a hard worker. I'm able to work in a moment. I'm a team player. I can meet consensus. I can work on various tasks, and I can make sure that I meet deadlines.
Do you know that most of the history of African Americans, we never had a voice, we had to create one. But that's not true in my biography, because I represent the 2nd or 3rd wave of the integrated student. I was permitted to say and do things that my father and older brothers and sisters could not do. That is important. I could go places. And as a result of being able to go places, to school, to go to work in certain places, I could have a voice. I'm permitted to have a voice.
Let me take it back a little bit. I remember clearly as a young man with my father watching boxing. And after the boxing match was over, whoever the fighter was, they would come on television and the announcer would start asking them questions. And they would, well man, we'll try my best and we just want to work hard and it will make her, and see what I'll be saying now. They couldn't speak. And my father and my mother would just cringe. And I knew why they did that, because when it came to being black and African American, when you came on camera and they thrusted a microphone in front of your face, back then in the 60s, you knew they were speaking for all of us. So my parents were like, look, son, if you ever get the chance to do that, remember something. You are representing the entire race, whether you like it or not. That's just the way it is. You make sure you know how to speak, that you're intelligent enough to convey your message without cursing, convey your message without slang if you have to, but be able to be understood. So yeah, if you're a pro athlete and you're being asked to take lessons on public speaking, do so.
So I think what we need to do is give them an opportunity to do more than just put the ball in a hoop, hit the home run, catch the touchdown. We need to make sure that when they're going out here, for instance, the NBA does a thing called NBA Cares. We want these athletes to be able to stand in front of the kids and read Cat in the Hat. We want them to be able to understand that they have a duty because young people are looking up to them. And so we don't want them to just look up to you because you're a gridiron star. We want people to be able to look up to you because you have both and. So I think of Ray Allen. I think of Ray Allen, who's really articulate. I look at Allen Iverson, and I look at how Allen Iverson is articulate, but at times Allen Iverson is swayed to want to stay in that position of my swagger and yo, what's happening, what's going on, what's happening, dog. So I think that the NBA and just all professional teams would do a justice of giving their athletes on both sides of the color line public speaking skills. I think they need to, because they're the face of the franchise. And oftentimes when we see these athletes, we do cringe.
And you got to know there's a time and a place. There's an ebb and flow. So go back to your example when you say about the athlete who doesn't speak well. When you're at home in the family barbecue, that's fine. Okay? Now let's take on the opposite end. Tiger Woods has a crossover effect. If you want a crossover effect, I'd say get the person to teach you how to speak a certain way. But I've had a coach earlier in my career, not about speech, but just corporate politics and culture. And one of the things she said to me, Jeffrey, to take on a different role doesn't mean that you have to lose yourself. So I'm more concerned about if that poor athlete rises to the level of now being a pro athlete, does he lose himself? Do you ever notice someone who this happened to? They're African American. They started to be coached. And how they come across and the image they're projecting are far apart.
Mm-hmm.
I think that education is important, Claude, but sophistication is equally as important. They're two different things. I call being sophisticated rather, expanding your horizons, traveling, opening yourself up to new places, new ideas, new attitudes, and being able to incorporate that into your everyday life as you communicate to people.
Have you ever come across that kid who was exceptional?
I've come across a lot of young people who have been exceptional, who have actually entered into oratory contests and have won. The opposite of that is that I've come across a lot of young males who just continue to want to talk, slang. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with slang, but there are times where you have to really talk appropriately if you're going for a job interview, if you're presenting in class. And so it's really both and. So for me, it's not either or. It's rooted in both and. I've both had young people who have just spoke to a manner where it's just been profoundly eloquent. And I've had young people who you want them to just come into the office and you want to sit them down and say, listen, we need to really teach you how to really, articulate yourself.
For some reason, from growing up in a large family, I was the ninth of 10 children. And I was encouraged at a young age to really speak. I've always been the spokesperson very young. Because my family is not formally educated. My parents were much older than me. And so my brothers used to always encourage me to speak. So I started out in Sunday school speaking, but it was at people's funerals. The death of my grandmother in North Carolina, I was about in junior high. And she passed away, and she had mental health problems. And she kind of lived in her own little world. And I went down there with my mom and brothers and sisters in this old rundown church. I delivered her eulogy.
You delivered her
Yeah.
eulogy.
And
Wow.
so I delivered her eulogy. It was about 1996 or 7. And I said, my grandmother is a gift from God. And everyone in the church said, amen. And I didn't expect that. So the unexpected in delivering a message happens. Now what do you do with it? I've learned to relax and go with it. I was stuck. I didn't expect that response. So I said it again. My grandmother is a gift from God. And they went, amen, louder. And I remember that, Claude.
A lot of passion.
She didn't have a voice.
Right.
I've had to give her a voice.
Now, one of the things my teachers took notice of was that I was reading all of this, and I could read very quickly and very fast. So oftentimes, if we were going over a lesson and they wanted a student to read, they would always call on me because I could read quickly as well as succinctly, and you could understand me, and we can get through the lesson real fast. So I got called on a lot to speak. Henceforth, I would also get called on a lot to do things in assemblies, whether it was lead the class in the Pledge of Allegiance, whether it was to introduce a special guest that was coming to the school, whether it was to do a video about something pertaining to education, they would always call me for that stuff. So in high school, and I didn't even know this, I just thought, oh, I'm just being chosen to do this stuff. I was always the guy picked to give announcements. I would audition for the school plays. I would always get a part of some sort. Maybe not always the starring role, but a featured role. And I was singing on choirs. I was always acting. At the same time, I was on the school newspaper, and I was an athlete. So I was this well-versed, well-rounded kid, but still a kid who was just being called on to do a bunch of stuff. And Claude, it never went to my head. I was never cocky or arrogant about it. It was just, just something else to do that I just happened, I guess, to be good at.
When did you realize that you had the gift of oratory?
Well, I actually recognized it when I went off to undergrad at Johnson C. Smith University. I was called upon to do a lot of things with the student government there. I was called upon in the community to really talk to a lot of situations that were happening in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time. If you take yourself back to the 1990s, that was right around 1992 when Rodney King actually was being brutalized by the racist police regime of Los Angeles. And what I ended up doing was galvanizing students on campus in Charlotte, North Carolina at Johnson C. Smith University to really talk about some of the injustices that were happening. And it was at that time where I recognized that I was really articulating myself in a manner where I was persuading people, I was very convincing, and I was looking at things from a position of passion. And so it was at that point in time that I recognized that there's this gift, the gift of sound, the gift of voice that God has given me to affirm the people's worth, to speak truth to power, and to use the language as a vehicle to alleviate suffering of others.
My ability to understand people's pain is deeply rooted in who I am. I just always speak from the heart. And my cousin didn't tell me till a year later why. He says, Jeffrey, I knew your father, and I was mourning the fact that you didn't know him. And the way you said that brought your father to light. So this whole notion, Claude, of being able to be people's spokesperson, it's multidimensional and over time. In my family, at the school, in college, in graduate school, in the workplace, now in my professional life, I've always been the spokesperson.
Well, certainly Malcolm X, as well as, and Malcolm X did not have a full voice, but he had a great voice and tone to it. But he was someone else who was passionate and had the courage of his convictions.
Malcolm X, who actually morphed into El Hajj Malik Shabazz after he goes to Mecca and he comes back. eloquent orator.
Maya Angelou motivates me. I read a lot about her. She is my type of speaker. She's not afraid to take off the mask. She's deeply in touch with humanity and what is in a person's heart and soul.
I think of Dr. Maya Angelou. If you ever heard, you see passion, you see eloquence, but you also see grace on display. When Maya Angelou talks, I'm on the edge of my seat.
Certainly Martin Luther King, of course, who had a great cadence and a great resonance that right now he may be the staple by which other speakers may stand up against.
I think of none other than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the sense that he was eloquent, he was passionate, and more importantly, every time he spoke, he conveyed the message of social change.
Martin Luther King are absolutely moving. So we come from a very strong tradition of people being very good orators. That is deeply embedded in our history.
James Earl Jones, who, by the way, folks don't realize, he had a terrible stutter.
I heard that.
Terrible stutter when he spoke. And he had to practice and work on that through breathing techniques and through constant repetitiveness to learn how to speak properly. And at the same time, James Earl Jones knew how to keep it full and rich, but also sometimes to tone it down, to talk from here in order to convey a message. Sometimes you don't have to beat people across the head with this great instrument that you have.
Modern day, I would have to say Dr. Cornel West and my very own mentor over at Temple University, Dr. Anthony Montero.
Bill Cosby definitely when I was in college was someone, he had such high status, people looked towards. I think in probably my small town, it was the role of the minister to speak, because that was one of the few points in times or moments in times where you see a black man speaking.
Hey, hey, yeah. Hey, hey, yeah.
How have the ladies liked your voice?
I've been told it really comes in handy. I'm going to be honest with you. I first noticed that I had a pretty decent voice, to be honest with you, when I was talking to young ladies on the phone when I was in high school. And they would say, "Oh my God, man, you sound sexy." And I didn't know this. They would tell their girlfriends. And so their girlfriends would call just to hear me speak. Or they would put their girlfriends on the phone. And I'm saying to myself, hey, I got something here, man. So I would give out my phone number all the time, man. Because when you got on the phone with that amplification, you came across sounding smooth, like, yeah, I can do that, baby. I'm smooth all the time. I'm down with it, not a problem. Say what again? I can say that again. Whatever you need me to do. So yeah, it worked out really well in high school. And then because high school was the first time I got on the radio, and when folks heard your voice in a studio with the right amplification and everything, you sound so rich. My heroes on the radio in Philadelphia, Dr. Perry Johnson, and a guy who's still on to this day. And every time I see him, I tell him, Doug Henderson. Doug Henderson sounds like Doug Henderson all the time. Whether you see Doug in the studio, you see Doug in the supermarket, or whether we were playing a softball game, Doug Henderson sounds like Doug Henderson all the time. That's who he is. And to this day, whenever I see him, I say, Doug, all I ever wanted to be was you.
And so I would say to brothers, well, what is it that you like about him? Oh, I don't know, man. It's just the way he speaks. Well, think about his speech that he gave on race at the National Constitution Center. Very eloquent, filled with passion. He had teleprompts, though. Okay? And I wouldn't say that was an amazing speech. What he did was he addressed the Reverend Jeremiah Wright situation. He addressed some of the other challenges, but he didn't call for a national dialogue on race. He didn't talk about white privilege. He didn't talk about white supremacy. He didn't talk about the prison industrial complex and the emerging women's prison industrial complex where children are left behind without their parents. He didn't call for a need to mentor youth whose parents are incarcerated in state or federal prison. He didn't talk about anything that we could say, wow, let's take this and bring about social change.
Do you think he ever will address those issues?
I think he's scared to address those issues. I think he's scared to address those issues because I think what we have is a brilliant man, Columbia, Harvard, but I think one of the biggest challenges is we have to be careful because we might just have a new face on the American empire that's crumbling. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but the reality is Eric Holder could talk about race and he calls us a nation of cowards, and then Barack Obama 2 weeks later comes out and says, I wouldn't have said it like that. Well, we understand, Barack, that you can't say it like that, but don't diss the brother who's able to say it.
We have these wonderful opportunities, and it's a privilege to speak to others. Take it seriously. Good things can happen because of it. You can unite so many different people speaking somewhere. It is probably one of the most humbling things you can ever do. To speak somewhere, to have the privilege to inform others, you have to take that seriously.
Writing is just as important. Once again, both and. I was on a panel at Cheyney University 3 weeks ago, the state of education and the state of Pennsylvania education with the NAACP, and they have a program up there called Call Me Mister, where they're looking to recruit African American males to become teachers. It was started at Clemson University. I must admit to you that all of the 15 young men that I interacted with were extremely articulate. What I suggested to them, I said, you guys have some masterful verbal skills. I hope your writing skills are just as equal or surpasses your verbal skills.
One of the best paychecks you get, Claude, is when you're just anywhere in the street or at some event or at a cookout or a barbecue. And this has happened to me more than once. Some young guy or a young lady will walk up to me and say, aren't you Manuel Glenn? And I'll go, yeah. You came to my school, you came to Bartram, or you came to University City, and you spoke, and you came more than once. And I just want you to know, I heard what you said, and it made a difference, and I appreciate it. And you're like, wow. And I said, so what are you doing now? Oh, well, I own this A+. I have a franchise of A+. This is one of the 5 that I own. Wow. And you're like, that's wow, beautiful. Can I fill up for free? Something like, but that is the paycheck. No monetary check or a couple of dollars, no. When they come up to you and said they were able to be successful because of something that you said, there's nothing better than that. Nothing beats that.